Thank you for listening to the Unscripted Dreams Podcast with Joe and Marcus. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email us at unscripteddreams@gmail.com. If you're interested in listening to exclusive content that includes bonus episodes and our hindsight video series, please join us on Patreon at the Unscripted Dreams Podcast. If you're listening to our podcast on YouTube, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, or iHeartRadio. Thank you.
As we know, life is full of surprises, both good and bad. The day-to-day journey is full of unforeseen obstacles, and sometimes it's hard to see our way through. Beyond the norm and mundane are where unscripted dreams live. Join us for thought-provoking discussions and interviews to help us navigate through the fog and create our own path. We are the Unscripted Dream Podcast, operating outside the margins to motivate and inspire our audience. So today's episode is literally about real, like realness, like what is real? So what comes to mind when I think about real and the definition of real is like a real quote unquote, I don't know, put your expletive there, or a real person, whatever, is that, it's about what he or she isn't afraid to speak up for themselves, no matter what he or she faces. So a real whatever input don't need to call themselves real if they know that they are truly real. Like real people are there for their own people, no matter the situation. They won't bail. They won't give up. They're just there. So I guess they're there in the flesh as far as being real in the essence of being there. A stand-up person.
Yeah, Joe. So when someone comes up to you or something's going on, they say, "I knew you were always a real one," or "You're a real one," something like that. Something like that. I think we know where we're getting at, but to piggyback kind of off, you said, I agree with you for the most part, Joe. Just like someone who is true to themselves. Sometimes sometimes this person is blunt. They could be a blunt individual, but it can also be somebody that is just there for you, like regardless of your situation. So it kind of has two definitions, sometimes three definitions.
Right.
I say, but yeah, definitely someone who they're gonna tell it like it is, and they're like someone who's they're consistent, authentic. So that's my my initial thoughts on it.
Okay. Well, let's carry that momentum over to the first topic. So I guess chime in. I want to see what your thoughts is with this, but my take about a real one and the problem or issues I have with that sometimes stems from a lot of people thinking that their reality and what they see, so their own truth, they think that everyone can identify with that. Everyone looks and values that concept completely different. Being real can mean a lot of things. So I think it's very erroneous for you to assume that someone's definition of a real one is the same as yours.
Yeah, John, I agree with you. That's my biggest issue with the whole concept, is because depending on, like you're saying, Joe, depending on where you're at, like maybe like economically, like you're like culturally, where you're at, that definition is going to change.
Right. I was going to say a perfect example would be, say somebody that's a stand-up citizen, right? So the stand-up citizen, all they do is go home, go work, handle their responsibilities. They abide by the laws of being a U.S. citizen. Some people value that as being a real one, a stand-up citizen. But there's other people that say that, oh, you're a slave to the system. A real one is someone that bends the rules and makes a living on their own, or some type of wealth off of not necessarily doing it the traditional American way, because they feel like that's a way of being trapped, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And that's why the definition is more, it's like a fluid definition, because it changes based on our life experiences and what we're exposed to. And I think that, that's the first thing that's important to understand, is that it's almost like you're making this decision through a very specific lens on what constitutes as someone that's a real one. And I really think, well, that's one thing that we just need to accept is that it's not going to be a uniform definition. Like the concept isn't going to be uniform for everybody. But I think that the issue comes is when people can't accept the fact that it's going to be viewed differently by people in general.
And that's what makes it hard, because people tend to push their own reality onto other people's reality, and not realize the the conflicts that lie there. I just think that it's a very sensitive subject, just because everybody interprets things differently.
Yeah. And another, I guess, maybe people, I mean, Joe, have you watched The Wire?
Loved it.
You watched The Wire? All right. So Omar,
My guy.
maybe probably one of the most popular characters in the show. I mean, in some circles, Omar is considered like a real one because this man, he has a code, but he's a criminal. Don't get it confused that this man
Full-fledged criminal, untraditional one at that.
Yeah, and he creates havoc. Like he's creating havoc. He just has a code. Like he's out here committing crimes, but he has a code. And I think people like respect his like the code that he abides by. But in some circles, he'll be seen as a real one. But in other circles, they're like, this man's a criminal and he's no good to his community. But there's people in his community that respect him. They respect him. And there's some people that want to be him, this character in this show, not in real life. You know, there probably are some people that aspire to be like Omar, and that's a conversation for another show, probably. but I mean, that's another example, though, that I think is, you know, if you're familiar with that character and how he's portrayed in that show, and how people from those areas in real life perceive those people, you'll see that there's some. I mean, it's accurate in a sense. And you know, that's kind of I think what you're getting at. You're getting at, Joe, is the differences there of people's reality.
Okay. So what I'm thinking here is, to even define what a real one is, or to, I guess, appear to live up to that hype, I think the one thing that people need to consider is the process of understanding yourself before you can actually claim that status. So when I think of understanding yourself, I mean understanding truly what being authentic is. What does that mean in your community? What does that mean to you? What does that mean to your peers? Where are you trying to go with it? Does the status actually hold some type of value within your community or our society, how you live your life? Once you've determined that in the authenticity, as far as what it takes to be authentic, obviously this is something you have to live by. It's a code at this point. If you break the code, obviously you're not a real one anymore, right? So let's dive deeper into this. I think once you've actually made that determination, would you agree with me, Marcus, as far as it's very important for you to cultivate a commitment to being more self-aware of this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that, I mean, it goes, they say you have to understand yourself, and that really comes first. Because if you don't understand yourself, you don't know what you're exposing yourself. Like you just don't know what you're exposing yourself to sometimes.
Right. So let's go further. So when we think about cultivating yourself, do you think it's very important for you to, I guess if you're on the artistic or creative side, you may document this with journals. But I think one thing that's very important is you have other people that hold you accountable. What you think?
I agree. You got to have people that are going to tell you the truth, let you know when you're falling or slipping. I agree with that.
Yeah, because a lot of times we may perceive things as being one way when it's totally the other way. So that's why I think it's very important that you're surrounded by whatever you are or you want to be, to hold you accountable, because we all slip from time to time, or we may have a different stance on things and not realize we're not sticking to what we stand for. I would say the next one would definitely be do your research and evaluate yourself constantly. Being a real one is all about evaluating, like, what am I doing this for? Am I doing this for the people? Am I doing this for myself? Am I living by this code because it's getting me where I want to be? Those are the type of things you got to think of, I think, as far as being a real one.
Yeah. So one of the things that crosses just a scenario, make another TV reference here, is like one of the first things that come to come to my mind when like being a real one is that when like keeping it real goes wrong. And if you're familiar with Chappelle Show, you know, it's a pretty popular skit that he has entitled When Keeping It Real Goes Wrong. And Chappelle, he plays this character in this skit. If you have not seen this, go watch this if you're listening to this thing.
Amazing.
But he's this executive. He's a guy who came from like a bad background. He overcame the odds to get to where he's at. And he's in this meeting. He's like the vice president of this company. And he's in this meeting one day. And one of his, I guess the guy that mentored him, he said something just like that offended him. But it wasn't intentional. Like it wasn't intentional. It wasn't
Ignorance
malicious or anything like that. Yeah, it's like that. And like this character played by Chappelle, he loses it. It's like he had enough, and he loses it. So he's a successful guy in this meeting, and then before this, and he just like loses his cool. So he's cussing. And keep in mind, this is comedy, so this is like a skit, but he's like cussing this guy out, like saying like rap lyrics, like throws up Wu-Tang, all this stuff. Man, it's funny when you watch it, but he ends up, of course, by his actions, he loses that job and he ends up like working at a gas station, cleaning windows, like scrubbing with the windshields and the windows on people's cars. So, you know, he made a decision. Because like you were saying, it's like there was nobody in that scenario to really hold him accountable. Like there probably needed to be somebody right there on spot to check him as soon as he started to kind of go down that road. But there was nobody there to help him out. But you know, he lost his cool and he lost everything that like the positives that he had going for himself. And you know, there's a consequence. I think there's just sometimes there's a consequence to being like real, to saying sometimes and doing the things that you really want to do. Like you have to understand that there's going to be a consequence to that also.
You know what? That seriously reminded me of the one Keeping It Real from the Chappelle Show. Another one where the lady's like, I don't like people playing games on my phone.
Oh yeah.
That was one of my favorite ones because somebody was playing games on her phone, and what she do? She got mad and she thought she was a real one. So what she do? She pulled up on the chick and said, "What's really hood?" Beep. Next thing you know, she was behind the glass, shackled up. And that's when Keeping It Real went bad.
Yeah. So that Joe, I mean, pull me off this topic if you got some things you really want to say. But you know, I feel like in a situation like that, like I think, you know, like if you're in a situation where someone like they offend you and they say something to you and you're like you want to tell them something and you want to be real with somebody and really tell them those things, like you have to think like what's the alternative? Like wouldn't it just be easy to, you know, correct somebody? You don't always have to correct somebody in a polite way. Like you can respectfully let them know that they're out of pocket. I mean, I've done it many a times. But
that's one of the things that frustrate me about Keeping It Real. People don't realize that it's a constant redefining yourself. It's always an elevation. That's what Keeping It Real is. You know, Keeping It Real isn't just necessarily about you sticking to your code or your principles, but you also have to grow too. Like, am I going to be dumb enough to put myself in a situation where I'm going to pull up on somebody and I already know the consequences? Like, in a way that's keeping it real, but that's not the best way about keeping it real. She could have kept it real in a different way by saying, all right, for sure, and block the number. You get what I'm saying? It could be stuff like that instead of just taking it to the full extent. So what it makes me think about with keeping it real in situations like that, saying stuff that you shouldn't say, or committing crimes that you shouldn't. I think people should constantly redefine their values. And after that, by redefining your values, you should also open your mind a little bit, just because that's the whole thing. You're supposed to expose yourself to new ideas and multiple perspectives at all times. Because who wants to be trapped in a cycle of judgment repeatedly? That's why we always talk about people being closed-minded. Perfect example, I could say, like, when I left from high school and I went away and moved away from home and went to college, and I, ended up coming back after graduating and stuff. It put a whole new perspective in my brain. Like, I can't do not even remotely half to what the stuff I used to do, because I went out there and I was seeking enlightenment. I was looking for a better way. I grew up, I matured. And I think that that's more so about keeping it real than anything, because if I didn't get that knowledge, I probably wouldn't be here speaking in front of you today. I'd probably be on the same dumb stuff. And, I might have been more so a statistic, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, Jay make a good point, a real good point about redefining like your values, because you change, like you're talking about, like going home, like after you probably, what was it, your first semester? How often did you go home in college, Joe?
The first year I would go home maybe every 2, 3 weeks. That next year, not so much. I was gone, and I was long gone junior and senior year. Like, I was like never coming back because I settled at that point.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you realize, I realized this as well when I went home for winter break, like winter semester, like after the winter, you're home for like a month when you're on semesters too. So you got to have something to do. But when I went home, I realized that like some of the people, not all the people that I hang around, even if they were still there, like they were doing stuff like I'm like, man, I can't be around like y'all anymore. And it's because one of the things is that, like as you're saying, as far as enlightenment, like you would think of some of the things that you were doing, you wouldn't even think that that stuff could get you in trouble sometimes. Like you didn't think that you were doing anything wrong,
Because
but
you didn't know.
yeah, but once you know better, and that's what I think you mean, Joe, by redefining your values. Like once you know better, you have a responsibility to do better. And like that's the thing. Like it was like, man, I know better now. I realize that like even though I'm not the one doing all these things, like maybe you're associated with people that are doing this kind of like things they shouldn't be doing, and you have to create that distance for your own well-being and for the the things that you have going on for yourself. And I think Joe, you realize that, and from what you're saying, and I realize that as well. So after I went home that first semester in college for winter, I was like, I'm never going back home again for the whole time, and I never went home after that just because, like at that point, sometimes you have too much to lose, and that's why it's important to realize what is going on and having the not being like you said, Joe, like not being closed minded and being open to things that are going on in your environment and what's beneficial for you. And like I said, that definition of you being like real, it changes as you change, as you're exposed to new information and new experiences. Like that term as it applies to us as individuals will change.
And that's why you gotta always let your past self go, man. You always gotta put your foot on the throttle, man. Don't let it get away from you. Like, it's okay for change. Like, change is good. Like, change can be transformative, man. Like, it's okay to let go of your past and embrace new things, man. This is what keeps you on the up and up and looking forward to a new day. Like, embrace who you are in the moment of what feels right to you now. Like, nothing else matters, because you're going to always look back hindsight and be like, what the hell was I thinking? You're always going to think that. But I mean, you can't do nothing about it, because at that time you didn't have the knowledge that you have future or forwardly thinking, or when you're
Mm-hmm.
looking at things hindsight. So of course everything's going to look at like a moment of vulnerability, because that's just how life works. It's scary, but that's how you become your most real self, is by actually processing that and actually cultivating courage to keep moving forward.
Absolutely. And Joe, I want to add that one thing about like when you run up against people, I know Jay, you said it's ignorance to an extent, but sometimes you run across somebody and you feel the need to like it's my responsibility to let them know how bad they've messed up right now. And you might be the first, like sometimes I've been the first person to check somebody on something, and it's, you have to decide what's the best way to go about doing that. But in my experience, when you find that it's your responsibility to correct somebody and let them know that they're out of pocket, like they usually do one of three things. The first is they double down on it, and that person, it's usually no hope for them. Like they just don't get it if they double down on what's going on, or they're just too proud to realize it, or just don't care. I mean, it's, that, but or they'll apologize and they'll seek understanding. They say, "I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Can you explain? What's going on?" Or thirdly, they just act confused. Like they have no idea. Like they'll just act like they have no idea, like no clue that they've done anything that offended you, and it just does not process. And it may never process to them that they've done something to offend you or to offend someone that or just something that you stand for or respect. So you have to be prepared to deal with those scenarios. So you're not you're not putting yourself in a situation where you end up in a adverse situation because you escalated the situation further than what it needed, where it needed to go. Joe, what do you think about that?
I think you're right on track. I think we have the same idea for this episode, man. It's all about being real, not only first primarily with yourself, but also being real with others, man. Like when you were just speaking about everything, like, it's okay not to go along with the crowd, especially if you know better. You know what's going to happen. You know those outcomes. It's your responsibility to educate at your discretion. Like nobody's reprimanded or required, or it's not mandatory to give your knowledge or pass it down to someone else, especially if they're not trying to hear it. That's not your job. But at the same time, I've promote and encouraged you to empower people to change, because if you change and empowering people to change, it's only going to make your circle and your circumstance way better than before. But that's another conversation for another episode. I think that, this plays into our last episode where we talked about power of negativity, man. You got to avoid surrounding yourself with toxic individuals. Anybody that's not on your campaign, they got to go. If they can't understand what you're trying to do or what you're doing, they got to get out of there. I'm not saying that they got to get immediately out there, but you got to have some type of situation there where, like, if they're drinking and you're not about the drinking, or if they're doing drugs and you're not about doing the drugs, I'm just giving you an example of something you can identify with. You got to get them out of there, or maybe deal with them on certain occasions where they're only sober, like knowing their schedule. Like maybe, on Thursdays and Friday nights, that's when they turn up. So you hang out with them prior to them turning up, and then you hang out with them when they recover. So it's just things like that that make all the difference in the world as far as your thought process and how you carry yourself. You don't cut yourself, or you don't lack the process of being a real one. People actually will consider you being a real one just for the fact that you have those principles and you have standards for yourself. People respect that. That's what labels you as a real one. You're set and you're confident in how you carry yourself versus letting their bad habits influence you and change you and corrupt you.
Yes, Joe, and I agree with what you're saying. And it's part of, you have to, like, you have to be observational. You have to see what other people are doing. And you have to, like I said, man, adjust your standards, adjust your values as well. And, the best thing that you can do for yourself is, be real with yourself. Like, like I said before, like if you're not honest with anybody else, be honest with yourself. And it really becomes a conversation about, being authentic, and what's authentic to you, being you, is going to change over time. And everybody's not going to grow with you because we all grow at different rates. Some of us are on, some folks, believe it or not, are regressing, believe it or not. But sometimes people they're going in the opposite direction, and you have to make a decision to cut ties with people, or like Joe was saying, just pick your days when you hang out when you hang out with these people, not the days where they're getting involved in stuff that will potentially get you jammed up. But it also comes a time when sometimes hanging out with somebody on their like their quote unquote off days when they're not getting into things. I mean, you find yourself guilty by association, and you have to take that into account as well, because I mean, even like Joe, like you're saying, like when people they get out there, they turn up, you don't know what they're getting into, and you don't know what the residual effects of what was going on those days where they were involved in some nonsense. You don't know what those residual effects are going to be that spill over into those good days, or presumably good days that will have come in and affect you.
Exactly, man. And make another example out of that for people that can't comprehend what's being said. Think of it in this way. Say you have a sibling that has a health issue, and what they do is they actually aggravate that health issue. Say that by them smoking cigarettes, maybe that conflicts with their health issue. In most cases, it does. And you say like, hey man, I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to be around you. I don't want to smell it. You want to do that because you don't want to weigh it down on your conscience that you actually support this person actually destroying themselves. I've ran into situations like this on countless occasions with people, and I still do. And I stand clear. Like, they can't do nothing but respect it. Like I said, again, that's what makes you a real one, man. You don't have to be the best communicator, but you also have to know when to say no about certain things, man, because you can't enable things that are harming people that you care about. I mean, you can, but I mean, that don't make you a real one, right? So with that being said, one thing that really makes me tick about the real one and the status is people always feel like they have something to prove, especially when you hype them up and say, "Oh, you a real one? Oh, I am for real." Like, everything starts internally, man. It starts internally. Everything starts from within. If you're living by that and you're fully convinced from a mental standpoint that you are a real one, you will be one. Um, when I think of being a real one, I think of integrity. That's all I think of. That's what I live by, is being in integrity. That's what I live by. But it is what it is. Some people got different words for integrity, but that's what I am. That's what I love to practice to the best of my ability. I ain't the best at it. I would be lying if I failed, but I'm telling you that that's what I strive for. So when I think of those type of things, it also makes me comprehend the concept of not having to prove anything to anybody. You are your own man. You are your own woman. You are your own whatever. And by you actually determining that and making sure you know what's good for you, you don't have to be out here proving what you are or what you could be. You don't have to live these lies, because regardless of how you live it, there's always going to be people out there that's still going to bleep with you. There's always people that are always going to invest in you just because you are who you are. How you perceive yourself is never the same as how other people perceive you, ever. And that's the most mind-blowing thing to me. You may perceive yourself to be one thing, but other people look at you for different reasons as being something else. So you might be like, okay, I'm the hardest dude out here. Like, I'm the hardest dude out here in the streets. I got everything right. But that next person looking at you like, man, you a clown, you a goofy, but I only hang around you because you make me laugh. Like, people have all kind of different reasons why they bump with you and why they like you and why they dislike you. And it's not your job to make that determination. What is your job is to, is it really being conducive to how you live your life?
Yeah, that was great. It was great, Joe. And I think this will be my last words. But
Okay.
I think that sometimes the the realest thing that you can do is like do what you feel is right, and that's like sometimes you're going to be by yourself. Like, you're going to be in a situation where you're the only one who sees something a certain way, and you can't allow yourself to be swayed on that. And that's just part of, like, sometimes you're just gonna be by yourself. Like, you'll be by yourself, especially if you're hanging around, if you're associating with people who aren't like in agreement and don't have the same values that you have. If you're fighting up against that all the time, then it's a constant struggle. And I think that it's in our human nature to find connection with other people and to be, connected to people and have these relationships. But there are times when those people that are around us, those people that we are connected with, are not always the best people. And they can lead us down a path that you don't want to go down, or a path that you'll regret later on in life. So, sometimes you have to walk away. Sometimes you have to create that distance. But you have to remain, to the best of your ability, remain true to who you are. And it's, like I said, like, sometimes you might find yourself you might be an outcast. You might be somebody that they're like, we're not going to call Marcus because he's not going to drink as much as we're going to drink, or he's not going to do all these, these silly things that we like to do. And you have to be okay with that. Like, you have to understand that, you have something that you have going on for yourself, and you're not going to let these other people, get you off the path because of like silly stuff like peer pressure and your need to be, like, your want to be included. And that's goes back to what Joe was saying, like understanding yourself, knowing yourself first and foremost. If you know that, then you won't fall for that. You won't get pulled down into that path and into that nonsense. So, just, like, be you, and don't be scared. Don't be scared to be different, because sometimes you're different and you're doing what's right. You're doing what's right. And sometimes everybody else, or a majority of the people, are doing something that they might not even understand, that they're themselves will cause them some pain down the road. So, if you're, like I said, if you're out there and you hear that and that makes sense to you, then you know that you're probably on the right path if you find yourself having to isolate yourself from certain people and avoid certain situations. But that's all.
Okay, well, I'm gonna wrap up my spiel, and the last thing I want people to get through their thick skulls is accepting the process of, or accepting other people's realness. So not only are you out here being real or attempting to be real, there's other people that have their own perception or process of what's real. And the one thing I want everyone to realize is it is what it is. And I'm going to say it again, but everyone is different, and that's okay. Like, that's not your decision. You don't make the judgment call on that. So with that being said, the differences between people, whether they be sexual, spiritual, professional, physical, whatever, okay, it shouldn't intimidate you under any circumstance unless it's something you want. And even with that, that's borderline not okay. So instead of like that, how about we just start honoring the differences and appreciating the realness of other people that are not afraid to be their quote unquote authentic self, no matter how different it is from how we live, instead of just being a hater. Instead of just teasing people, instead of bullying people, like, let these people live, let these people do what they do. It is what it is. And that's all I got to say.
All right. Closing out, man. Yeah, take care. Be safe.
Later.
Gapstone.